What was a woman worth in medieval Europe? To answer that question, we have to look at how medieval men tested their women. These were often cruel tests, but they had one purpose. Take, for example, the custom of giving a gift of red shoes. In many areas of medieval Europe, when a young woman got engaged, also known as the spit test or the urine test, this test was used to determine if a woman had engaged in sexual activity before marriage. This test was designed to check if a woman's undergarments were clean. This test was performed by a male member of the bride's family, and was designed to make sure that the girl was indeed a virgin. This bizarre test was used to determine if a woman was a witch. It was believed that witches had superhuman strength and couldn't bleed. This test was developed by the Spanish Inquisition, and was used to determine if a woman had committed the crime of bruta and she still had to deal with the ultimate test. The ultimate test of a good wife, motherhood. You see, in medieval Europe, a woman's value was largely determined by her ability to bear children. After all, they were just trying to ensure that their wives were good. Were these tests fair? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to follow us on social media for all the latest updates. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye! And if you want to learn more about life for women in the Middle Ages, I highly recommend checking out my playlist on medieval women. I've got videos on everything from fashion to medicine to everyday life. There's something for everyone, so go ahead and check it out. Christian women who could produce heirs and keep up their reputation, right? Honestly, I'm just glad that I didn't live in that time period. Can you imagine having to go through all these tests just to be considered a good and proper woman? No, thank you. If she failed to produce a male heir, she risked being abandoned or divorced. And believe me, nobody wanted to risk that. So bearing children was not only a duty, but a necessity for a woman to prove her worth. This pressure to conform to societal expectations led to a multitude of dangerous practices, such as the use of birth control and abortion. And those who failed to comply faced social stigma and persecution, meaning heavy petting, in private. The test involved inserting 2 fingers into a woman's vagina, and then lifting them out to examine them for any bodily fluids. Any fluid on the fingers was seen as evidence of the crime, and the woman was subject to punishment. Talk about a violation. This test was not only humiliating, but also dangerous as it exposed women to infection and other health risks. So to test for witchcraft, a woman would have to hold her nose and then blow until she bled. If she didn't bleed, she was considered a witch and subjected to torture and execution. Can you imagine the amount of blood that must have been flowing from this woman's nose? Needless to say, this test was not only inaccurate, but also incredibly painful and dangerous. The hymen was examined to ensure that it was intact, and any abnormalities were seen as evidence of sexual activity. Now, this practice was not only painful but also inaccurate and unscientific. It was based on the belief that the hymen, which is a thin membrane that partially covers the vaginal opening, was a reliable indicator of virginity. They had to endure all kinds of tests, from the ridiculous to the horrifying, just to prove their worth. But despite all this, they managed to make significant contributions to society. They worked as healers, writers, artists, and even rulers. They also played a vital role in the economy, working in fields such as weaving, spinning, and other domestic tasks. But unfortunately, their achievements were often overlooked and undervalued. However, the hymen can be torn or broken for various reasons, such as vigorous exercise or the use of tampons, and it's possible for a woman to have no hymen at all. Despite this, the virginity test persisted throughout history and was used to punish women for having sex before marriage. In a medieval world where women didn't wear underwear, this was an important test to ensure that she was practicing good hygiene. If her undergarments were soiled, it was seen as a sign of promiscuity and she would fail the test. I can only imagine the looks of horror on the faces of these men as they inspected these garments. Today we might think it's a bit weird to examine a woman's underwear, but in the Middle Ages it was all in the name of science. I guess, it was believed that if a woman had had sex, her urine would have a certain odor to it and would be undrinkable. During the trial, the woman's urine was collected in a container and presented to a group of men. They would then smell it to see if she had passed the test. This practice was common throughout medieval Europe and was even used in witch trials. Women who failed the test were often accused of witchcraft and heresy, and were subjected to torture and execution. Just goes to show that these tests were not only humiliating but also dangerous. Her suitor would give her a pair of red shoes to show off to her friends and neighbors. The shoes were a symbol of her engagement and a way for the community to celebrate with her, but there was also a practical reason behind the gift. Red was the color of courage, and the shoes were a reminder for the wearer to be brave and strong in her new role as a wife. This custom was mentioned in the medieval romance poem, The Romance of the Rose, and was later immortalized in the painting The Arnolfini Portrait by Jan van Eyck, to ensure that the woman was worthy of being called a good wife. This was a test of a woman's virtue and modesty. When a woman was grinding grain, which was a task usually done by female servants, she would be given a sieve with a small hole in it. If the grains of corn went through the hole, she passed the test and was deemed virtuous. However, if any other part of her body went through the hole, then she was considered to have failed and was judged as being a. This test may seem ridiculous, but it was a way for medieval men to control the narrative around female sexuality. By ensuring that women were covered up properly, they believed they were protecting their wives from temptation and sin. So today we're going to talk about some of these tests and what exactly they proved about medieval women. Welcome back to my channel. I'm your host, and this is The Medieval Woman. As you all know, if you've watched the channel before, medieval men had very high standards for women, and it wasn't enough to just be pretty or come from the right family. No, a medieval man wanted his wife to be a true Christian woman who was also healthy, young, fertile, and obedient. And to make sure she was all these things, he would put her through a series of tests designed to prove her worth. Now, some of these tests seem quite harmless by today's standards, and could even be considered sweet. Another seemingly innocent test was the sieve test. Speaking of covering up, let's talk about another test that was designed to test a woman's modesty: the water test. The garment test, on the other hand, was a lot less dangerous, but no less embarrassing. Speaking of cleanliness, one of the most disgusting tests that women had to endure was the virginity test. But perhaps even more disgusting than the virginity test was the nosebleed test. While the nosebleed test was used to identify witches, another test was used to identify female traitors, the two-finger test. But even after passing all these tests, a woman's ordeal was not over. As you can see, the lives of medieval women were far from easy. So while these tests may seem insane by today's standards, they were a necessary evil in the eyes of medieval men. So what do you think? And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I'd love to have you here.